Welcome to Midnight Paradox, where sleep is deep and truth is deeper. It doesn't begin with laziness. It begins with a voice. Quiet. Familiar. So familiar, in fact, that you mistake it for your own. It tells you that you're not ready. That tomorrow will be brighter. Maybe waiting is wisdom. And so, you wait. But time doesn't wait with you. It watches silently, and your potential is waiting for you to explore. You light the candle. You open the notebook. You plan. You organize. You breathe deeply, preparing yourself for the right moment. But the right moment isn't coming, because the moment you're waiting for is built on a lie. That readiness is something you feel. It's not. It's something you earn, through action, through risk, through failure. This isn't a video about time management. It's a funeral for all the versions of you that never made it into the world, because you were too afraid to be seen starting. Welcome to Midnight Paradox. This is the psychology of delay, and it's time to walk into the truth you've been quietly avoiding your entire life. The whisper before the wait. It doesn't begin with laziness. That's the surface-level explanation, the easy answer people throw around when they don't understand what's really happening underneath. It begins with something far more subtle, far more intimate. A voice, a whisper, a quiet, familiar thought enters your mind, not like an alarm bell, but like a gentle nudge. It says, "Not right now." And because it speaks in such a calm, convincing tone, you trust it, you believe it, you even thank it. This voice doesn't demand. It doesn't accuse. It doesn't shame you. That would be too obvious, too confrontational. Instead, it comforts. It speaks your language. It borrows the cadence of your inner dialogue. It tells you that you deserve to rest, that you've been pushing hard lately, that you're just waiting for the right mood, the right setting, the right energy to come along. It disguises itself as wisdom, patience, and discipline. And in doing so, it wins. Because this voice is not coming from anywhere. It is born in your nervous system. It is the product of deep psychological wiring designed to keep you safe, even when safety is no longer the goal. You delay not because you're careless, but because you care so deeply that the thought of trying and failing becomes more terrifying than the cost of doing nothing at all. This is the quiet architecture of self-preservation, not from lions or bullets, but from shame, embarrassment, and the devastating possibility that you might try your best and it still might not be good enough. Each task, each project, and each moment of responsibility becomes a mirror, a reflection, and that reflection does not always tell you what you want to hear. It threatens to expose the fragile parts of you, the parts you've been working hard to hide, even from yourself. So you linger in the in-between, in that strange space between intention and execution. You make the list, you rearrange the desk, you check your calendar, you light the candle, you tell yourself you're getting ready. But readiness never arrives, because readiness isn't coming. It's not something you feel, it's something you do. And yet, we wait for it anyway. As if inspiration is a divine favor, granted only to the worthy, as if momentum is earned by wishing, as if clarity will drop from the ceiling like a revelation if we just sit still long enough. But that's the lie. That's the venom hidden in the whisper. You are not waiting for clarity. You are avoiding exposure. You are avoiding the friction of movement, the possibility of being seen trying and not being applauded for it. Procrastination isn't a character flaw. It's not a lack of discipline. It's a strategy, one that worked at some point in your life to help you cope, to help you avoid pain, rejection, or criticism. But now, it's a ghost that follows you into every room. It tells you that tomorrow will be better, that you'll have more energy later, and that you just need to clear your mind. But time is not waiting with you. It is moving, quietly, without mercy. The mind loves the fantasy of later. Later is safe, later is clean, later has no risk. But later is also empty. It is where your potential goes to die in silence. Every time you say, "not yet," You're mourning a version of yourself that could have existed had you just begun. Not perfectly, not brilliantly, just honestly. There is no perfect moment. There is only the moment you decide to begin. And beginnings are rarely graceful. They are not cinematic. They are not inspiring. They are clumsy, awkward, raw. Beginning means confronting the gap between your vision and your ability. It means facing the fact that your first try might be embarrassing, that your draft might be unreadable, that your voice might tremble, and that your effort might go unnoticed. And that's exactly why you avoid it. Your brain is wired for pattern recognition. It remembers the pain of past exposure, the time you tried and were laughed at, the time you cared and were ignored, the time you built something and no one showed up to see it. That history, stored in your nervous system, translates into hesitation, into resistance, into fatigue that magically appears the moment you sit down to do the thing that matters. You are not lazy. You are protecting yourself from the risk of being seen, because being seen is vulnerable. And vulnerability, despite all its potential for connection, also opens the door to judgment. The moment you begin, you create something that can be measured. And if it can be measured, it can fall short. That's the fear. That's what keeps you frozen. But frozen is not safe. It is a slow death. It is the erosion of identity, the gradual forgetting of who you are when you are in motion. Because every day you don't begin, you are becoming someone else. Someone is more hesitant, more doubtful, more fragile. Delay doesn't just steal your time, it rewires your self-perception. You start to believe that maybe you're not the kind of person who starts, or finishes, or follows through. But that belief is a shadow, a byproduct of stillness. Because the truth is this: the moment you begin, the moment you take action, even the smallest one, the story changes. Not because the whisper disappears, but because you stop obeying it. The whisper might never go away. It may always be there in some form, quietly suggesting that you wait just a little longer. But when you act despite it, you reclaim control. You interrupt the loop. It's not about silence, it's about defiance. The defiance of writing the first sentence, even when your hands are shaking, of hitting publish, even when you're unsure, of showing up, even when you'd rather hide. Because what you fear is not the action itself, but what the action might reveal. But here is the paradox. The action doesn't reveal your weakness. It reveals your strength. Not because it's perfect, but because it's honest. It is proof that you are willing to step into the unknown, to confront yourself, to do the thing even while afraid. You won't feel ready. You don't need to. You will only feel ready after you have already begun. Readiness is not a requirement, it's a reward. And the only way to claim it is to move. Begin, not because it's the right time, but because there is no such thing. Begin, not because the whisper is gone, but because you are ready to stop listening to it. Begin, not because you're confident, but because confidence is something you build in the act of beginning. The whisper will speak again tomorrow, and the next day, and perhaps forever. But from this moment on, it doesn't get the final word. You do. The myth of readiness. There's a story we all carry, often without knowing it. A quiet belief passed down through school, through culture, through repetition, the belief that readiness is a gatekeeper. Unless you feel confident, clear, focused, and fully energized, it is irresponsible to begin. You've been told that starting without being ready is foolish, that it's better to wait, to think, to prepare. But this is the myth, one of the most seductive myths your mind will ever cling to. Because the truth is, readiness is not something you feel, it's something you find, and the only way to find it is to start before it arrives. You imagine readiness as a moment, a mental state, a rush of clarity and certainty, maybe even a kind of spiritual alignment. You believe that one day you'll wake up and just know that it's time. You'll feel it in your bones, the energy will be there, the path will be obvious, the doubts will fall away. But that day doesn't come, and every time it doesn't, you wait again. You tell yourself you're just being thoughtful. It's smart to delay until you feel more confident, more prepared, more like the ideal version of yourself. But that ideal version lives in a timeline you never enter. Because readiness is a mirage. It moves as you move toward it. The more you wait for it, the further away it gets. And deep down, part of you knows this. You've seen it happen before. The project you didn't start. The idea you talked about for months. The message you never sent. The change you never made. What you were really waiting for was not readiness. You were waiting for the fear to go away. You were waiting to stop feeling doubt, anxiety, and hesitation. But those feelings are not symptoms of unreadiness. They are the price of entry. They are the emotional toll for stepping into something real. The people you admire, the ones who make, speak, build, move, they don't start because they're fearless. They start while they're still afraid. The difference isn't that they feel more ready than you do. The difference is that they don't need to. Readiness is a decision, a posture, a shift in relationship with fear. It's the moment you stop letting discomfort dictate your timing. Because the longer you wait to feel ready, the more you teach your brain that readiness is a condition, a requirement. And that belief becomes a barrier you rebuild every single day. When you tell yourself, "Not yet," your brain records that. It starts to believe that action should only follow confidence. That movement only belongs to the certain. That starting is something reserved for people who already feel strong. But strength is not a prerequisite, it is a result. Every person who has ever created anything worth sharing has felt like you do. Not enough, not ready, not capable. And they began anyway. Not because the conditions were perfect, but because they were tired of waiting for them to be. Think of all the false starts you never allowed yourself to have, all the bad first drafts you never wrote, all the shaky first attempts you never took. Think of how many times you told yourself, "This isn't quite the right moment," as if the right moment was going to announce itself. No right moment is coming. There is no internal siren that sounds when the time is ideal. That's the myth. That's what steals your life in inches. Because while you wait to feel ready, time does not pause. It advances, quietly, mercilessly. And readiness does not arrive. Because readiness is built one uncomfortable step at a time. The reason you don't feel ready is not because you're unworthy. It's because your brain is doing its job. It's protecting you from uncertainty, from risk, from emotional exposure. But that protection, while well-intentioned, is misplaced. Because it ends up protecting you from growth, from discovery, from becoming. You must stop treating doubt like a stop sign. It is not. Doubt is part of the road. Discomfort is part of the climb. And fear is not a red light. It is a signal that what you are doing might actually matter. If it didn't matter, you wouldn't be afraid. This is the shift, the necessary one, the one you've been circling for months, maybe years. You must stop negotiating with fear. Stop asking for permission from feelings that are not designed to guide you toward progress. Your feelings will catch up to your movement, not the other way around. Clarity is built through contact with reality. Confidence is built through action. Strength is built through repetition. And momentum? Momentum belongs to those who begin, even while shaking, even while doubting, even while whispering, "I don't know if I can do this." Start anyway. Because readiness is not earned by waiting, it is earned by walking. Sacred rituals of avoidance. Before most people begin, they prepare. But for many, that preparation becomes the performance. You clean your desk, you light a candle, you open the document, and then close it again. You make coffee, you glance at your notes. You read one more quote, scroll one more page, adjust the font, rearrange your apps, reply to an email that didn't need replying. And somewhere deep in your mind, it all feels like part of the process. These are your rituals, They are quiet, familiar, and soothing. You believe they're helping. You tell yourself they're setting the mood, getting you ready, helping you focus. But if you look closely, if you track the pattern honestly, you'll see that these rituals rarely lead to real movement. They don't lead to breakthroughs, or progress, or results. They lead you in a circle. Rituals feel productive because they imitate structure. They give your day a shape. They make you feel in control. But control is not the same as momentum. Rituals mimic the rhythm of real work, but they rarely contain its substance. They are the shape without the force. They become something you rely on emotionally, not practically. The lighting, the setup, the playlist, they aren't wrong, but they aren't the path either. They are the doorway you keep cleaning instead of walking through. And the reason you keep returning to them isn't because they're necessary, it's because they're safe. There is no vulnerability in organizing your desktop. There is no emotional risk in brewing a second cup of tea. But there is exposure in the first sentence. There is friction in the blank page. There is confrontation in the first imperfect attempt. And that is what you are actually avoiding. Not the task, but the part of yourself that feels inadequate, the part that doubts, the part that fears it will fall short. Your rituals, for all their polish and familiarity, have become your shield. And behind that shield, your ideas never have to face judgment. They never have to be seen, or tested, or refined. They remain theoretical and therefore perfect. But perfection in theory is the death of progress. People don't always recognize this avoidance because it's disguised as care. It looks responsible. No one questions someone who says, "I'm just making sure I have everything in place before I start." That sentence sounds like maturity. It sounds like discipline. But underneath it is often a fragile, unspoken fear. What if I begin and it isn't good? What if I try and I can't follow through? What if the vision I have in my head doesn't survive the translation into reality? That fear, once internalized, becomes the architect of your rituals. You don't just do them, you depend on them. And every time you repeat them without beginning, you reinforce the story that you're not ready. But what if you let the ritual stay and still started anyway? What if you allowed the comfort of the familiar while also embracing the discomfort of effort? You don't need to destroy your routines. You need to see them clearly. You need to separate the part that soothes from the part that moves. Because the work only begins when the ritual ends, or more accurately, when it no longer gets to make the decisions. This doesn't mean that rituals are useless. It means they must be put back in their place. You can keep the candle, you can play the music, you can set the mood. But those things cannot be a condition for your courage. They cannot be the prerequisite for your participation in your own potential. Because when you give them that kind of power, they become more than comfort. They become limitation. The core of this problem is that you've linked action to control. You've told yourself that the conditions must be perfect before you can begin. But perfection is an illusion. And the more you chase it, the more you stall. The idea that things must feel right before you move is a form of learned helplessness. You have taught yourself that your effort depends on the atmosphere, that your discipline relies on the setup, that your creative identity can only emerge when all the variables align. But none of that is true. What's true is that real work begins the moment you step into the uncertainty, not after you've removed it. You've probably had this thought before: once I get my routine down, I'll finally be consistent. And so you build the routine, you tweak it, you optimize it, you design it to eliminate friction. But what if friction is the point? What if the resistance you feel isn't a flaw in your system, but the actual signal that you are entering meaningful territory? When you avoid the discomfort, you avoid the edge of your growth. That edge is sharp, it stings, but it's real, and it's the only place where anything worth doing gets done. It's easy to mistake energy for direction. Just because you're moving doesn't mean you're going anywhere. Just because you're busy doesn't mean you're progressing. Rituals can trap you in this illusion. They can make you feel like you're almost there, but almost is infinite. You can live in almost for years, and many do. The harsh truth is that no ritual will ever feel as good as the act of finally beginning, the messy, uncertain, exposed moment of creation that is where identity is built. Not when you're lighting the candle, but when your hands are on the keyboard. Not when you're setting the scene, but when your thoughts are being challenged by reality. The ritual is the silence before the song. But without the music, it's just silence. Begin anyway, while the coffee is still brewing, while the room isn't perfect, while your thoughts feel scattered, while your plan is still forming. Begin, not because the ritual is complete, but because your future is waiting on something more than another perfectly arranged afternoon. It's waiting on your willingness to begin in motion, not in comfort. Perfectionism, the noble saboteur. Perfectionism doesn't arrive dressed as fear. It doesn't announce itself as resistance. It doesn't show up holding you back with obvious force. Instead, it disguises itself as excellence. It shows up with compliments. It tells you that your standards are high, that your eye for detail is rare, that you simply care too much to release something into the world that isn't worthy. And because it speaks in the voice of your ambition, you trust it. You believe that your reluctance to begin or to finish is a mark of integrity. But it isn't. It's paralysis wrapped in virtue. You hold back not because you're lazy, but because you've built an identity around doing things right. The moment something feels rushed, flawed, incomplete, or clumsy, it threatens that identity. It threatens the image you have of yourself as someone with taste, with vision, with mastery. So you delay, you revise, you polish, you imagine, you plan, you optimize. You do everything except act. Not because you don't want to move, but because you don't want to shatter the illusion. Because once you begin, once you put something real into motion, it will inevitably be imperfect. And if it's imperfect, it might expose you not just to others, but to yourself. This is why perfectionism is so effective. It doesn't attack your goals. It aligns itself with them. It pretends to serve them. It whispers that your idea is too special to be rushed, too important to be mishandled, too meaningful to be attempted in anything less than ideal conditions. And so you wait. You wait for the perfect window of time, for the perfect inspiration, for the perfect mood. You wait until your skills are better, until your confidence is stronger, until your doubts disappear. But the wait never ends, because perfection has no finish line. It is not a target. It is a moving standard, designed not to elevate you, but to keep you from starting. You might think this form of delay is noble, that it's better to wait than to make something mediocre. But the truth is that everything worthwhile begins as something mediocre. Mastery is not born in precision. It is born in permission, the permission to begin poorly. Every polished final product you've ever admired was once a messy, embarrassing, uncertain first attempt. The people you think of as brilliant were once clumsy. The work you call genius was once a risk. And what separates the people who finish from the people who wait is not talent. It's tolerance, the ability to tolerate the awkwardness of early stages, the discomfort of imperfection, the vulnerability of effort without applause. Perfectionism is not a reflection of high standards. It's a fear response. It's a way to avoid judgment. Because if you never release anything, no one can criticize it. If you never finish, you never risk being seen as someone who tried and failed. And if you never begin, your fantasy stays intact. You can imagine your potential as unlimited because it's never been tested. That's the real seduction. As long as you stay frozen, you get to preserve the story that you could be extraordinary without ever having to prove it. But that story is a cage. Because while it protects your ego, it starves your growth. It disconnects you from the only feedback that matters: reality. You don't grow through thought. You grow through contact. You grow through friction, through revision, through showing up with work that's not ready, and learning through the act of doing. There is no preparation that will eliminate this process. There is no amount of planning that will save you from the need to stumble. This is where perfectionism becomes cruelty. It demands that you get it right without giving you permission to be wrong. It creates a world where only flawless execution is acceptable. And because you can never meet that demand, you stay still. You talk about your ideas, but never build them. You write outlines, but never the pages. You collect tools, but never use them. You spend your energy guarding an image instead of building a reality. And that image, over time, becomes a burden. It weighs more than the failure ever would have, because at least failure teaches you something, at least it moves you forward. At least it gives you something real to work with. Perfectionism gives you nothing. It robs you of time, energy, opportunity. It keeps you in a constant loop of hesitation, constantly reaching for a standard that was never meant to be reached. To break this loop, you have to redefine what good means. Good is not flawless. Good is done. Good is honest. Good is visible. It's not the absence of mistakes. It's the presence of momentum. You need to stop measuring your work by how close it is to your vision, and start measuring it by whether or not it exists. Because the only thing worse than making something imperfect is making nothing at all. The voice of perfectionism will tell you that your standards are what make you special, but it's not your standards that will shape your life. It's your ability to move through resistance. Your ability to tolerate mess, to sit in the discomfort of something unfinished, to be seen in your incompletion. That is where transformation happens. Not in the idea, but in the execution. Not in the image, but in the effort. You don't need to lower your standards. You need to change your strategy. Let your first draft be bad. Let your early versions be underwhelming. Let your first steps be off balance, and keep going. Because only those who move earn the right to refine. Perfection does not precede progress. It follows it. It's not where you begin. It's what you discover along the way, through iteration, through feedback, through persistence. The moment you accept this, the weight begins to lift. You realize that the work isn't sacred. What's sacred is your willingness to do it. You realize that the version of you who begins, even while uncertain, is braver than the version who waits for the perfect moment. And you realize, perhaps for the first time, that perfection is not something you owe the world. What you owe the world is honesty. What you owe yourself is motion. Perfectionism will offer you peace in the short term. It will spare you from judgment, protect your image, and let you keep dreaming. But it will never let you build. It will never let you finish. It will never let you live the life you've imagined. That life can only be built by someone willing to be imperfect in public. Someone willing to be misunderstood, to be average for a while, to be wrong. Let that be you. Begin, not because it's perfect, but because it's real. Finish, not because it's flawless, but because it matters. Move, not because you're confident, but because standing still is costing you something far more precious than your pride. It's costing you the chance to become the person who no longer needs to be perfect in order to begin. Intelligent delay. How the smartest avoid the hardest. The most intelligent people are often the most creative in their avoidance. They don't waste time on trivial distractions or empty excuses. They don't procrastinate with mindless scrolling or laziness that's easy to spot. Instead, they build intricate systems of hesitation. Their delays are sophisticated. Their avoidance is strategic. They mask fear with logic, disguise insecurity with research, and call it preparation, alignment, or optimization. But behind all of it is the same resistance that haunts everyone else, only more cleverly hidden. Smart people know how to make their reasoning sound convincing, even to themselves. They delay decisions under the banner of long-term thinking. They postpone launches under the pretense of refinement. They stay stuck in cycles of analysis, pretending it's momentum. But deep down, they're not moving, they're circling. Every new insight becomes a detour. Every detour becomes a loop. They collect information like armor, hoping to insulate themselves from risk. But in doing so, they also insulate themselves from reality. The more capable a person is intellectually, the more elaborate their avoidance can become. Intelligence becomes a double-edged sword. The same mind that can construct brilliant solutions can also construct airtight rationalizations for doing nothing. Instead of starting the project, they design the framework. Instead of writing the chapter, they research 3 more. Instead of making the call, they map out 10 possible conversation flows. They think their way into stagnation. And the danger is that no one questions them. Their delay looks responsible. It sounds mature. It gets praised. People say, "You're so thoughtful," or "You really know how to plan." But what no one sees is that the planning has become a substitute for participation. The mental activity looks like progress. It feels like movement, but nothing is actually changing. Nothing is being built. Nothing is being exposed to the world. Because to expose something real would mean risking imperfection, and for the intelligent mind, that is the deepest threat. At some point, thought becomes a hiding place. It offers the illusion of control, the promise of certainty, the comfort of endless possibilities that never need to be tested. And so the smartest among us build echo chambers inside their own heads. They consult ideas instead of experience. They trust hypotheticals over trial and error. They hold the map and avoid the terrain. But life doesn't reward theoretical navigation. It rewards those who are willing to walk, get lost, make mistakes, and adapt. Intelligent delay is not about laziness. It's about fear masquerading as intellect. It's about the avoidance of emotional exposure, hidden behind layers of mental refinement. Because the more you know, the more you see the risks. You see what could go wrong. You understand how complex the system really is. You recognize how many unknowns you'll have to face. And so you do what feels safe. You stay in the conceptual. You plan longer. You think harder. You wait for more data. But clarity isn't the reward for thinking. It's the reward for doing. There's a myth that says, the smarter you are, the more likely you are to succeed. But success is not reserved for the clever. It belongs to those who can move in uncertainty, who can tolerate friction, who can act before they feel entirely confident. Intelligence can help, but only if it's paired with courage, because courage is what gets you to the starting line, and execution is what gets you to the finish. Some of the most brilliant minds in the world stay trapped in ideation. They build mental masterpieces no one ever sees. They imagine solutions to problems they never touch. They stay one step away from risk, convinced that one more layer of thinking will make the leap easier. But it doesn't. It just makes the moment heavier. The longer you delay, the more fragile the imagined outcome becomes. And soon, the idea becomes too precious to try. It can only live in theory, because the cost of testing it has grown too high. This is the trap. And it doesn't feel like sabotage. It feels like strategy. That's why it's so dangerous. It becomes part of your identity. You begin to define yourself by your potential, by your ability to understand, design, and foresee. But understanding is not an impact. Design is not change. And foresight, no matter how refined, is not transformation. To break the pattern, you have to stop negotiating with your intellect. You have to stop asking for more certainty. You have to recognize that every layer of added complexity might just be another layer of fear. At some point, you have to walk into the unknown, not with all the answers, but with the willingness to find them along the way. The smartest people aren't those who know the most. They're the ones who know what to do when they don't know. They're the ones who can move while uncertain, adapt while learning, and still take action while doubting. They trust process over perfection. They trust rhythm over brilliance. They trust movement more than mastery. You don't need to stop being thoughtful. You don't need to abandon your depth. But you do need to stop mistaking internal motion for external progress. You need to stop calling your fear strategy. Because the world doesn't care how much you know. It cares what you do. And your life, no matter how insightful you are, will ultimately be shaped not by what you could have done, but by what you actually made real. So write the first flawed sentence. Launch the incomplete plan. Enter the uncomfortable room. Begin the thing before you're ready. Let your intelligence walk beside your action, not in front of it blocking the way. Because if you're always waiting to be smarter, more certain, more informed, you'll never move. And the cost of that stillness over months, over years, is something no intellect can recover. Time isn't waiting with you. There is a silent belief embedded deep in the way we think, one we rarely speak aloud but constantly act on. It's the belief that time will wait for us, that our delays are harmless, that the life we intend to build will still be there when we're ready to start. We tell ourselves that a few days won't matter. We'll begin after we get through the weekend, after this season passes, after we fix a few internal things, after the timing feels better. But time is not keeping track of your reasons. It is not on pause while you find your courage. It is not slowing down just because you've convinced yourself you need more space. Time is moving, without hesitation, without emotion, without mercy. And while it moves, your potential waits. It waits silently in the background, untouched, untested, unclaimed. It watches as your lists grow longer, as your plans get more elaborate, as your intentions become more poetic. But it never sees the light, because all of it remains theoretical. All of it is waiting for the signal you keep promising. Will come the clarity, the energy, the mood. But what you haven't realized is that your time is not an infinite container. It's a leaking one. And the longer you delay, the more you lose not just opportunity, but identity. Every day you don't act, you strengthen the version of yourself who doesn't act. You don't just delay the work, you delay becoming. And that delay has a cost, not all at once, not in a way that screams, but in the quiet erosion of confidence, in the slow decay of self-trust, in the subtle shift from "I will" to "I might" to "maybe I was never meant to." That shift doesn't feel dramatic, but it is devastating, because it transforms your relationship with time from partnership into avoidance. You begin to feel haunted by your own plans. The unfinished projects, the unopened files, the untouched goals, they start to weigh more than you thought they could. Not because the task is heavy, but because of the time they've occupied rent-free in your mind. Each one becomes a thread in the fabric of regret, and regret doesn't always show up as sadness. Sometimes it shows up as numbness, as apathy, as a quiet detachment from your own ambition. You begin to disconnect, not out of laziness, but out of fatigue, because carrying everything you're not doing is exhausting. And all the while time moves. It moves past your hesitation. It moves past your rituals. It moves past your good intentions. It doesn't care how thoughtful you were about beginning. It doesn't care how close you came. It only records what actually happened, what you actually did. That's the brutality of it. Time rewards execution, not proximity. It doesn't give credit for potential, only for presence. We think we can negotiate with it, that we can delay and still return later and pick up exactly where we left off. But you don't return as the same person. Every delay changes you. Every pause reshapes your readiness, because while you were hesitating, the world changed. The version of you who was inspired has cooled. The urgency has dimmed. The alignment you once felt is harder to find. What once felt possible now feels distant. This is how delay becomes loss. And loss, when it's silent, is even harder to confront. No one sees the projects you never finished. No one mourns the stories you never told. No one notices the art that never left your head. But you do. Even if you try to forget, some part of you remembers. And that remembering turns into restlessness, into shame, into the sinking feeling that something inside you is slipping away, that you are becoming less of who you imagined and more of someone who just imagines. You might think, but I needed time to be ready. You didn't. You needed courage. And courage doesn't grow while you wait. It grows when you move, when you show up, even while uncertain, when you commit, even while afraid. Because it's not time that strengthens you, it's engagement. You become real in the doing, not before, not in thought, but in motion. Time isn't waiting with you. There is a silent belief embedded deep in the way we think, one we rarely speak aloud but constantly act on. It's the belief that time will wait for us, that our delays are harmless, that the life we intend to build will still be there when we're ready to start. We tell ourselves that a few days won't matter. We'll begin after we get through the weekend, after this season passes, after we fix a few internal things, after the timing feels better. But time is not keeping track of your reasons. It is not on pause while you find your courage. It is not slowing down just because you've convinced yourself you need more space. Time is moving, without hesitation, without emotion, without mercy. And while it moves, your potential waits. It waits silently in the background, untouched, untested, unclaimed. It watches as your lists grow longer, as your plans get more elaborate, as your intentions become more poetic. But it never sees the light, because all of it remains theoretical. All of it is waiting for the signal you keep promising. Will come the clarity, the energy, the mood. But what you haven't realized is that your time is not an infinite container. It's a leaking one. And the longer you delay, the more you lose not just opportunity, but identity. Every day you don't act, you strengthen the version of yourself who doesn't act. You don't just delay the work, you delay becoming. And that delay has a cost, not all at once, not in a way that screams, but in the quiet erosion of confidence, in the slow decay of self-trust, in the subtle shift from "I will" to "I might" to "maybe I was never meant to." That shift doesn't feel dramatic, but it is devastating, because it transforms your relationship with time from partnership into avoidance. You begin to feel haunted by your own plans. The unfinished projects, the unopened files, the untouched goals, they start to weigh more than you thought they could. Not because the task is heavy, but because of the time they've occupied rent-free in your mind. Each one becomes a thread in the fabric of regret, and regret doesn't always show up as sadness. Sometimes it shows up as numbness, as apathy, as a quiet detachment from your own ambition. You begin to disconnect, not out of laziness, but out of fatigue, because carrying everything you're not doing is exhausting. And all the while, time moves. It moves past your hesitation. It moves past your rituals. It moves past your good intentions. It doesn't care how thoughtful you were about beginning. It doesn't care how close you came. It only records what actually happened, what you actually did. That's the brutality of it. Time rewards execution, not proximity. It doesn't give credit for potential, only for presence. We think we can negotiate with it, that we can delay and still return later and pick up exactly where we left off. But you don't return as the same person. Every delay changes you. Every pause reshapes your readiness, because while you were hesitating, the world changed. The version of you who was inspired has cooled. The urgency has dimmed. The alignment you once felt is harder to find. What once felt possible now feels distant. This is how delay becomes loss. And loss, when it's silent, is even harder to confront. No one sees the projects you never finished. No one mourns the stories you never told. No one notices the art that never left your head. But you do. Even if you try to forget, some part of you remembers. And that remembering turns into restlessness, into shame, into the sinking feeling that something inside you is slipping away, that you are becoming less of who you imagined and more of someone who just imagines. You might think, but I needed time to be ready. You didn't. You needed courage, and courage doesn't grow while you wait. It grows when you move, when you show up, even while uncertain. When you commit, even while afraid. Because it's not time that strengthens you, it's engagement. You become real in the doing, not before, not in thought, but in motion. The false hero of potential. There's a quiet praise we learn to accept early in life, a compliment so seductive that we carry it like a crown. You have so much potential. For a while, those words feel like gold. They feel like proof. They tell you that greatness is inside you, that you're meant for more, and that you're one of the rare ones. And because you hear it often enough, you start to believe it. You start to build an identity around it. You're not just a person. You're someone who could be something incredible, someone who hasn't yet bloomed, but definitely will, someday. But hidden inside that compliment is a trap. Because potential is a placeholder. It's not a title. It's a suggestion. It tells you what might be true if you ever followed through. And that if becomes everything. Because what no one tells you is that potential is temporary. It's not a promise. It's not something you get to hold forever. It's a fragile state of tension between what you could become and what you've actually built. And the longer you remain in that in-between, the more you start to mistake the compliment for the destination. Being called full of potential is only flattering when nothing has been tested. It's only comforting when your ideas are still untouched by execution. The moment you begin, the potential starts to disappear. It gets replaced by results, some better than expected, many worse. And if your identity is built around potential, that transition feels like a loss. You're no longer the person who might be extraordinary. You're just someone trying, someone who might fail, someone who has to face the gap between their imagined greatness and their actual ability. That's why many people stay in the realm of potential for years, sometimes for life. Because potential is safe, it's beautiful, it's limitless. As long as it isn't tested, it can't be disproven. You can believe anything about yourself when you're not under pressure to prove it. You can be a genius who hasn't started, an artist who just needs time, a writer who's going to blow everyone away once the right idea comes, once life settles down, once the feeling is right. But none of it is real, not yet. The potential is not who you are. It's who you might be if you do the hard thing, if you begin before you're ready, if you keep going after the first disappointment. If you build resilience instead of collecting praise, that's the only way it becomes something more than fantasy. And yet, our culture rewards potential disproportionately, especially when you're young. You get praised for your ideas, for your ambition, for your capacity to learn quickly or solve problems creatively. You get applauded for being a natural, and you start to think that the mere fact of your ability is enough. You start to believe that being capable means you will automatically succeed. But capability means nothing without application. And brilliance means nothing without consistency. Potential becomes a false hero when it makes you passive, when it becomes a reason to wait instead of a reason to act. You tell yourself, I know I could do this if I really tried, but you never fully try. Because trying would mean facing reality. It would mean risking the possibility that you're not as ahead as you thought. Maybe this will be harder than expected. Maybe the raw material inside you needs more time, more work, and more iteration than you're ready to admit. And so you protect your image. You protect the narrative that you're someone with something special. You protect it by not testing it, by keeping it clean and untouched. But over time, that protection becomes your prison. Because while the outside world still sees your potential, you start to feel the weight of your inaction. You start to see that potential doesn't pay your bills, build your portfolio, or sharpen your craft. You start to feel the dissonance between the praise you once received and the emptiness of your actual output. That gap grows, and as it does, so does the shame. Quiet shame, not loud or dramatic. Just that low-frequency hum of knowing that you haven't done what you said you would, that you haven't become what you imagined. And the longer it continues, the harder it is to begin. Because now, it's not just about starting, it's about confronting how long you've delayed. But the truth is this: your value is not in your potential, it's in your participation, in your willingness to engage, in your ability to show up again and again, not because you're guaranteed success, but because you're done worshiping an idea of yourself that never gets tested. Your greatest growth won't come from what you think you could do. It will come from what you're willing to do consistently, even when no one is watching, even when no one is praising you. Especially then. Potential becomes dangerous when it becomes a substitute for action, when it becomes a source of identity instead of a reason to move. It's easy to build a fantasy around the life you could have. It's harder to build the discipline required to create it. But only one of those will change your life. Only one of them can make your future different from your past. And you don't need more time to unlock your potential. You need more truth. The truth is that it's time to step out of the hypothetical. It's time to let go of being promising and start being real. It's time to move, not because you've arrived, but because you're ready to stop hiding behind the illusion of what you might be. You were not made to be admired for what you could become. You were made to become it. Shame is the root. Most people think they procrastinate because they're disorganized, distracted, or just not trying hard enough. They think it's a problem of discipline or attention. But at the core of chronic delay, deeper than fear, deeper than habit, there is often something heavier, something harder to name. That thing is a shame. Not embarrassment, not regret. Shame. A private, quiet belief that there is something fundamentally wrong with you, something broken or insufficient, and that beginning will only make it visible. Shame doesn't speak in clear language. It doesn't announce itself. It's not like fear, which you can usually identify. Shame is subtler. It works behind the scenes. It reshapes your decisions, rewires your instincts, and filters every possible action through the question, what will they think of me if I fail? And worse, what will I think of myself if I confirm what I already suspect? Because that's what shame does. It builds a narrative of internal deficiency. It tells you that trying and falling short is not just a setback, but a confirmation that you were never enough to begin with. When you delay, you're not just avoiding the task, you're avoiding the possibility of shame being proven right. You're avoiding that intimate moment where your best effort gets exposed to daylight and measured by others, or worse, by your own impossible standards. Because as long as the work doesn't exist, it can't be judged. As long as it's still in your head, it's still perfect, untouched, safe. This is why so many smart, capable people live in cycles of hesitation. They aren't lazy, they aren't confused, they are ashamed. Sometimes for reasons they can't even fully articulate. Maybe it started years ago with a parent who criticized too quickly, a teacher who humiliated them when they tried, and a moment of failure that felt like rejection and never fully healed. That emotional scar doesn't go away. It sinks deeper, and it becomes part of your self-concept. It tells you that making an effort is dangerous, that caring is dangerous, that showing your real capacity, your real passion, your real self is dangerous. Because if people see it and still don't value it, what then? What's left? Shame convinces you that hiding is safer than trying, that waiting is wiser than exposing yourself. It tells you that you need to become perfect before you begin, that your flaws must be resolved before you can step into the arena. But perfection never arrives. Flaws don't disappear. And the longer you wait, the more shame reinforces itself. You feel ashamed for not starting, so you avoid the work even more. And the more you avoid, the more shame grows. It's a closed loop, one that feeds itself endlessly unless interrupted. And here's the cruel twist. Shame doesn't need anyone else to be present. It doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need critics. It only needs you, your thoughts, your comparisons, your impossible inner standards. Shame is an internal surveillance system that monitors every move you make and whispers, "You'll mess this up," or worse, "You always mess this up." It tracks your hesitations, your revisions, your half-finished starts, and uses them as proof that you were never meant to finish anything at all. You might even mistake shame for humility. You might tell yourself you're just being realistic, just not overestimating your abilities. But real humility is the willingness to try, knowing you might fail. Real humility is the courage to stand in your effort without demanding perfection. Shame is something else. Shame is self-protection disguised as modesty. It keeps you quiet, invisible, and contained. And the longer you obey it, the more it rewrites your identity. You stop thinking of yourself as someone who's just stuck. You start believing you're someone who isn't capable. You stop seeing the delay as a problem and start seeing yourself as the problem. And when that happens, your own mind becomes the prison. Every task becomes a trigger. Every attempt becomes a threat. Every new beginning carries the weight of a lifetime of unresolved criticism. But the truth is, shame cannot survive in motion. It thrives in silence. It feeds on isolation. It lives in delay. But the moment you act not perfectly, but honestly, you interrupt it. The moment you step into the process, shame loses its narrative. It wants you to believe that exposure is a death sentence, but it's not. It's liberation. When you start, when you try, when you allow yourself to be seen in the mess of becoming you, rewrite the story. You reclaim authorship over your own effort. And you begin to see that your worth is not conditional on performance, that your dignity is not tied to the outcome, that your value is not waiting at the end of a perfect project. It is already here. It is in your willingness to engage. This is not easy. This is the emotional work beneath all creative and meaningful labor. The work of healing the voice that says you're not good enough. The work of standing up, not to the world, but to yourself, and saying, "Even if I fail, I will not disappear. Even if I stumble, I will not retreat. Even if I am seen, I will not collapse." Shame may be the root, but it's not the truth. And you are not broken. You are not incapable. You are not late. You are not less than. You are a person learning to move again. You are someone who has been carrying too much weight in silence. And now, finally, you are beginning to put it down. The fear of being seen trying. There's a reason you hesitate, even when you know exactly what needs to be done. A reason you delay, even when the tools are ready. The goal is clear, and the window is open. It's not confusion. It's not laziness. It's not even about perfection anymore. It's something deeper, more personal, more difficult to admit. It's the fear of being seen trying. Trying implies effort. Trying reveals care. Trying says, "This matters to me." And the moment something matters, it becomes vulnerable. Because once you try, you risk failure. But more than that, you risk the exposure of your sincerity. And for many people, that's the real fear, not just failing, but failing in public. Not just falling short, but doing so while visibly invested. We've learned to treat effort as dangerous. Somewhere along the line, you were taught that effort is weakness, that if you're truly talented, things should come easily, that needing to try too hard is a sign you're not good enough. So instead of trying openly, you pretend. You act casual. You say things like, "I didn't really put much into it," or "I barely prepared." That way, if you don't succeed, you have an out. You can say, "I wasn't even trying." And if you do succeed, you get the bonus points of seeming effortless. That's the game. But the cost of playing it is enormous. Because when you're afraid to be seen trying, you limit every part of yourself that requires risk to grow. You never fully commit. You never fully show up. You hold back in every room, every project, every conversation. You live with one foot in and one foot out, always performing, always protecting. And over time, this becomes your identity. not someone who is lazy or incapable, but someone who's chronically guarded, someone who never gives too much, just in case it's not enough. This fear is built over years, sometimes decades. Maybe it began with being laughed at for giving a wrong answer in school. Maybe it came from being told not to try so hard because it made others uncomfortable. Maybe it was the embarrassment of putting your heart into something and receiving indifference in return. Whatever the origin, the result is the same. You learn that to care is to risk, and to show effort is to make that risk visible. But what no one told you is that trying is the most honest thing you can do. It's the most human, the most courageous. It is not a weakness, it is presence. It is proof that you showed up to your own life with intention, that you were willing to take the intangible, your thoughts, your ideas, your values, and attempt to make them real, and real things can break. But only real things can grow. The people who move the world are not the ones who pretend not to care. They are the ones who care so much they are willing to be seen trying. They are willing to be misunderstood, underestimated, or ignored, because the act of trying is not about them. It's about the work. It's about alignment. It's about choosing to live on the edge of your ability instead of the comfort of your image. And yes, trying hurts. Because trying invites judgment. It exposes the gap between where you are and where you want to be. It makes visible all the imperfections you've spent so long trying to hide. But avoiding that pain doesn't protect you. It only guarantees a deeper one, the pain of never knowing what you could have become if you had allowed yourself to be fully seen. You don't avoid trying because you don't care. You avoid it because you care so much, and you're terrified that your best won't be enough. That you'll reveal your heart and it will be ignored. That you'll show your work and it will be dismissed. That you'll open your mouth and no one will listen. But what you don't realize is that people don't connect with perfect. They connect with effort, with intention, with presence. They connect with the courage it takes to try when there's no guarantee of success. The truth is, when you don't try, you rob yourself of the feedback you need to grow. You rob others of the chance to meet the real you. You keep showing the polished surface while hiding the substance. And even if you're praised for your talent, your silence will eat away at your integrity. Because deep down, you know that you're not living at your full depth. You're just performing at a safe level. There is no arrival point where trying becomes unnecessary. Not for the masters, not for the beginners. Everyone who has ever achieved anything of value has failed in full view. They've launched and been ignored. They've spoken and been misunderstood. They've tried and been met with silence. But they kept showing up. Not because they stopped being afraid, but because they stopped letting the fear make their choices. So you have to ask yourself, what are you protecting? Your image? Your pride? Your comfort? None of those things will build the life you want. None of them will create meaning. None of them will replace the quiet ache of unexpressed potential. Trying is hard. It will never not be. But it is also sacred. It is the bridge between your imagined self and your real self. It is how you make the internal external. It is how you carve out a life that reflects your values instead of your fears. And once you see that, you can stop waiting to feel ready. You can stop asking for permission. You can stop apologizing for the effort. Because the people who try are the only ones who change, the only ones who evolve, the only ones who create anything that matters. So let yourself be seen, not just when you win, not just when it's easy, but especially when you're still figuring it out, especially when you care. The mirror called effort. Effort is more than movement, more than work, more than energy spent toward a goal. Effort, when it's honest, when it's visible, becomes a mirror, a reflection, a way to see yourself not just in what you're doing, but in what you're revealing. And what you reveal, when you give real effort, is who you are without the mask. No performance, no deflection, no protection. Just the raw truth of your intention to meet your current capacity. That's why effort is so often avoided. Not because we don't want the result, but because we don't want the reflection. Because effort removes plausible deniability. Once you try, really try, you can no longer say, I could have done it if I wanted to. You can no longer hide behind the comfort of, I wasn't even serious. Effort takes away your safety net. It demands exposure. And that exposure is terrifying. Because effort brings you face to face with the gap between who you thought you were and what you can currently produce. The gap between your imagined excellence and your real limitations. And for many, that confrontation is unbearable. It's easier to stay in motionless potential, to believe you're capable of greatness without having to test it. Because once you test it, the truth comes out. And truth, for all its power, rarely matches the fantasy. You can live in that fantasy for a long time, years even. You can convince yourself that the reason you haven't succeeded is because you haven't really tried, that you're still warming up, that you're just waiting for the right time, the right tools, the right mindset. But underneath all of that, what you're really doing is avoiding the mirror, because you don't want to look and see someone who's not as ready, or skilled, or brilliant as you hoped. But what you forget is that effort is not a judgment, it's an invitation. It's not here to humiliate you, it's here to show you where to grow. Without it, you're stuck in illusion. You're shaping your identity around something untested, and the longer you do that, the more fragile that identity becomes, because anything that hasn't been challenged is soft, and soft things break easily. This is why some people never leave the planning phase, never go beyond the outline, never speak out loud, never submit the application, never publish the work, because those things make the effort real. And once it's real, it can be judged not just by others, but by yourself. And for someone whose identity is tied to high standards, that judgment cuts deep. It doesn't just question the work. It questions your worth. But this is the misunderstanding. The work is not you. The outcome is not you. Your current skill is not a verdict on your potential. It's a snapshot, a moment in time. Effort is how you close the gap between where you are and where you want to be. But to close the gap, you first have to look at it, and looking takes courage. It takes courage to see that the first version of your work won't be good, that your voice might shake, that your ideas might be confusing, that your body might not respond the way you imagined. But it also takes courage to see that none of that means you've failed. It just means you've started. And starting in any form is what separates the ones who change from the ones who wait. The effort is never wasted. Even when it goes nowhere, even when it leads to silence, even when it ends in rejection, because what effort gives you is clarity. It shows you what needs to be refined, what needs to be rebuilt, what needs to be rethought, but it also shows you what's working, what's alive, what deserves your focus. You can't get that from imagining, only from engaging. The mind will always try to protect you from this mirror. It will give you reasons to hold back. It will say, let's just do a little more research, or let's wait until we're in a better place mentally. But what it's really saying is, I'm not ready to see myself as I really am, and that fear is understandable. It's human, but it cannot be the thing that makes your choices. Because every day you avoid the mirror, you lose a chance to adjust, to improve, to step forward with more truth. Without effort, you can't calibrate your direction. You can't build resilience. You can't separate fantasy from reality. You stay trapped in an identity that only exists in your imagination, one that might sound impressive, but feels increasingly hollow. And eventually, that hollowness turns to shame. Not because you failed, but because you never gave yourself the chance to. And in that void, regret starts to take shape. Not loud, not sudden but slow. Quiet. The kind of regret that hums in the background of everything. The kind that lingers even when you try to ignore it. But it doesn't have to stay that way. The mirror doesn't go away, and it doesn't judge you the way you think it will. It reflects what is, nothing more. It tells you, here's where you're at. That's it, not who you are, not what you'll always be, just a moment, a measurement, a chance to respond. And if you can face it not perfectly, not confidently, but honestly, then everything starts to change. Because now, you're in the process, you're moving, you're learning, you're building something real, and nothing you build with real effort is ever meaningless. So look, try, allow the mirror to show you what you've been avoiding, because what you see there is no weakness, it's potential, and finally being tested. And that is where your real self begins to emerge, not in the reflection, but in your willingness to look. Fantasy self versus present self. There's a version of you that lives entirely in your imagination. You know this person well. They're disciplined, creative, consistent, focused. They wake up early, build routines, and follow through. They don't scroll for hours. They don't flinch when it's time to show up. They handle discomfort with grace. They execute. They produce. They win. You admire this version of yourself. You talk about them. You reference them when making plans. You tell yourself that you're almost there, almost aligned, almost ready to become them. But the longer you hold on to that imagined version of yourself, the more distant it becomes. Because the fantasy self cannot walk beside the present self. It can only float above, silently judging what you haven't done yet. This is one of the hardest truths to face. The person you think you are or could be is not real until your behavior proves it. You are not your intentions. You are not your potential. You are not your vision board or your detailed plan. You are what you do repeatedly. And the present self, the one that actually exists, is the only one that can move you forward. But when you're caught in the fantasy self loop, you don't want to confront the present self, because that version is flawed, that version struggles, that version doesn't match the ideal. And so, you avoid the confrontation, you stay in the fantasy. You imagine what your life would look like if you were operating at 100%. You map it out in your mind. You picture the projects, the routines, the pace, the energy. You get a dopamine hit just thinking about it. But you forget that fantasy produces no friction. It's smooth, effortless. It's perfection without process. And that's why it's so addictive. It doesn't cost you anything to imagine being great, but it costs everything to become it. When you live in fantasy, you give yourself the illusion of progress. You feel productive because you're thinking about the right things. You feel accomplished because your goals are well defined. But the emotional high of mental clarity fades fast when it's not backed by consistent action. And eventually, the gap between your fantasy self and your present self becomes painful. You start to feel like a liar, not to others, but to yourself. You feel the weight of unkept promises. You carry the shame of saying, "I will," for months or years, without doing so. And that shame begins to chip away at your self-trust. What makes it worse is that your fantasy self is almost always better than you, not just more successful, but more disciplined, more organized, more emotionally regulated. You start comparing yourself to a version of you that never had to struggle, never failed, never hesitated. And every time you fall short of that ideal, you reinforce the belief that something is wrong with you now, that you're defective. But the real problem isn't that you can't match the fantasy. It's that the fantasy was never built to handle reality. The present self is messy. It's full of contradictions. Some days you're focused. Some days you're exhausted. Some days you show up. Some days you can barely begin. And that fluctuation is not a weakness. It's humanity. The problem is not your inconsistency. The problem is that you believe consistency should feel perfect, that it should always be aligned with motivation, inspiration, or clarity. But consistency is built by acting despite the absence of those things. It's not about never missing. It's about not quitting when you do. You don't need to kill the fantasy self. You just need to stop treating it like a blueprint. It can be a compass, maybe, a loose vision, but it cannot be the standard by which you judge your every move. If it is, you will never allow the present self to be enough. And when the present self is never enough, it stops trying. Because no effort will be sufficient if it's always being compared to an ideal that doesn't sweat, struggle, or fail. The only way forward is through alignment, not with the fantasy, but with the truth about what you can do today. The truth about what your limits actually are, not as a verdict, but as a reference point. So you can grow from there. You begin with the smallest action that the present self can actually take. Not the action your fantasy self would take if they existed, but what you, as you are now, can commit to with honesty. That's the work. That's the edge. That's where change happens. The real shift comes when you stop asking, "What would the best version of me do?" and start asking, "What can I do today that is slightly better than what I did yesterday?" That is progress. That is embodiment. That is the slow, brutal, beautiful work of becoming. It is not glamorous. It is not inspiring most of the time, but it is real, and only what is real can grow. The longer you delay in pursuit of becoming the fantasy, the more life you miss inside the present, because your life isn't lived in the imagined future. It's built in the decisions you make today, right now. As you are, not as you wish you were, not as you hope to one day become, but as the flawed, still standing, still trying version of yourself sitting in front of the work. You owe that version your full attention, not your judgment, not your ridicule, not your shame. You owe them effort. You owe them clarity. You owe them a chance to build momentum without having to carry the weight of becoming someone who doesn't exist yet. The fantasy self is seductive, but it's hollow. The present self is difficult, but it's real, and real is what changes you. Every time. Memory as saboteur. You think you're procrastinating because you're tired, distracted, unmotivated. But beneath those surface-level reasons, something more powerful is shaping your behavior. Memory. Not just the facts of your past, but how your nervous system remembers them. Your body remembers failure. Your body remembers embarrassment. Your body remembers the sting of trying and not being enough. And every time you approach something meaningful, that memory activates. It doesn't do it loudly. It doesn't come with flashing lights. It shows up in the form of hesitation, a heaviness in your chest, a tightness in your throat, a sudden wave of fatigue. You think you're just not in the mood, but your body is reacting to a pattern. We like to think memory is a file system. We store moments, retrieve them, and look at them logically. But memory is emotion. It's physical. It's involuntary. You don't remember the details. You remember the feeling, the sick pit in your stomach when you fail in front of others, the burning in your face when you were criticized, the tension in your muscles when you realized you weren't ready. These experiences imprint on you, and over time, you start to associate effort with threat, not because the work itself is dangerous, but because something in your history told you that showing up is not safe. So now, when you sit down to begin, your mind starts scanning, not for inspiration, but for danger. It plays back to the moments when it hurt to care, when it hurt to try, when the effort was met with silence, or shame, or rejection. And even though you're older now, even though the environment is different, your nervous system doesn't know that. It only knows input and response. Work equals risk. Risk equals pain. So your mind does the smart thing. It pulls you away. It whispers that maybe you should wait. Maybe you're not ready. Maybe there's something else you need to do first. But what it's doing is protecting you from remembering what it felt like the last time. This is how memory becomes sabotaged. Not out of malice, not out of weakness, but out of a desire to keep you safe. Your brain is not trying to destroy your progress, it's trying to prevent pain. But in doing so, it starts to filter the future through the lens of the past. And when that happens, everything becomes heavier. Every decision feels harder. Every task carries more weight than it should. Because you're not just facing the thing in front of you, you're facing the echoes of everything that came before. Sometimes it's not even your own memory. Sometimes it's the memory of someone else's voice. A parent, a teacher, a friend, someone who told you that you weren't enough, that you didn't measure up, that you were too much or not enough, or simply not the kind of person who finishes what they start. Those voices stay with you, not always as full sentences, sometimes just as tone, as mood, as resistance that makes no sense on paper, but feels completely real in the body. This is why logic doesn't always work. You can know the task is simple, you know the risk is low, you know that you're capable. But logic doesn't override memory. The body reacts first. And unless you understand what's happening, you start believing the reaction. You start believing that the discomfort means you're not ready. But the discomfort is not a signal to stop. It's a signal that you've reached the edge of your conditioning, that you are bumping against the old memory, that you are standing in the exact spot where the past taught you to flinch. You will never grow if you continue to obey that reflex, because that reflex is not rooted in truth, it's rooted in history, and history does not determine who you are. It only explains how you learn to protect yourself. At some point, protection becomes a limitation. What once helped you survive now keeps you small. What once kept you hidden now keeps you stuck. And the only way to change that is to notice it when it happens. Not to fight it, not to suppress it, but to name it. You sit down to write and feel the urge to walk away. Name it. You start a project and feel suddenly tired. Name it. You want to speak and your voice goes quiet. Name it. This is the memory showing up. This is the nervous system trying to protect you. And the moment you name it, you give yourself a gap, a pause, a breath. And in that pause, you get to choose. Do I follow the reflex, or do I respond with something new? Rewriting this response takes time. It takes compassion. It takes understanding that your brain isn't broken. It's doing what it was trained to do. But it no longer serves you. You are not in danger anymore. This work will not destroy you. This task will not unravel your worth. This project will not define your identity. You are allowed to be new here. You are allowed to act from the present instead of the past. And the only way to do that is to let memory rise without letting it steer. You won't feel safe at first. That's normal. You will feel the echoes of the old reactions. But safety is not a prerequisite for movement. It is a result. You don't wait to feel safe. You move until your system learns that it is, that nothing bad happened, that you showed up and remained intact, that you did the thing and didn't fall apart. This is how you retrain the brain. One act of truth at a time. You will still carry your memories, but they don't have to define your behavior. You can thank them for their service and still choose something else. You can feel the fear and still open the file. You can feel the hesitation and still take the step. That is how you reclaim the present. Not by erasing what happened, but by refusing to let it dictate what happens next. The infinite loop of planning. Planning feels like progress. It gives your mind something to hold. It creates a sense of order, a feeling of movement, a structure that makes the future look manageable. You make the list. You map the timeline. You break the goal into steps. You color code the system. You imagine how it will all unfold. And for a moment, you feel in control. But control is not action. Order is not momentum. Structure is not creation. And if you're not careful, planning becomes the thing you do instead of the thing you were planning to do. This is the loop. You plan because you're unsure, because starting feels overwhelming, because the task is bigger than you expected or heavier than you can carry in one breath. So you break it down. That part makes sense, but then you break it down again. Then you tweak it. Then you reframe the calendar. Then you look for a better tool. Then you redesign the approach entirely. Then you ask if your system is even the right one. You're still working, still focused, still busy, but nothing is being built, nothing is being shipped, nothing is moving forward. You are inside the infinite loop of planning. At first, no one notices, not even you, because planning looks responsible, it looks mature, it looks like clarity. But what it often becomes is an elegant delay tactic, a way to stay close to the work without touching the vulnerability of execution. You feel like you're right on the edge of beginning, but the edge keeps moving. Because as long as the plan can be improved, you have an excuse not to act, and there is always something to improve. You convince yourself that this time you're getting it right. This time the plan will stick. This time the system will unlock the consistency you've been chasing. But systems don't create behavior. Behavior shapes the system. You can have the perfect workflow. You can have the cleanest setup. But if your identity is still tied to avoiding risk, no system can fix that. You don't need more refinement. You need more reality. Planning is safe. That's why it's so addictive. You can sit with your ideas, your tools, your outlines, and feel smart, productive, disciplined. But deep down, you know what you're avoiding. You know that starting is the real threat, because starting removes the illusion. It puts your clarity to the test. It invites mess. It exposes gaps. It opens the door to things not going as expected. And if your worth is built on control, that exposure feels like a failure. So instead of starting, you reorganize. You build systems that look impressive but are never actually used. You collect apps. You track metrics for work you're not doing. You refine your inputs but never create output. And eventually, you start mistaking preparation for purpose. You think that just because you're working hard on the plan, you're making progress. But progress only happens in the friction of doing. Without that, you're just designing scaffolding for a structure that doesn't exist. The longer you stay in the planning loop, the harder it is to leave. Because now, you've invested in the system. You've made it part of your identity. You start believing that if the plan isn't perfect, you can't trust yourself to begin. You create rules, rituals, and checkpoints. But those rules become rituals of avoidance. And those rituals keep you locked in theory. This is the trap. You start out trying to make the work easier. But in the process, you make the beginning impossible. Because the weight of the system becomes greater than the work itself. You're no longer trying to take a step. You're trying to carry a machine. Planning isn't the problem. Planning is valuable, but only when it leads somewhere, only when it is followed by commitment. The plan is not the thing. It is a tool. And tools are meant to be used, not worshipped, not endlessly tweaked, not held up as proof of your future success, just used. If it works, great. If it doesn't, adjust. But at some point, you have to decide the planning is over, and the building must begin. That decision is not emotional, it's behavioral. You don't wait until the plan feels perfect. You don't wait until the system feels seamless. You draw the line. You say, today I start. Not because the plan is complete, but because the work is more important than the architecture surrounding it. There will always be a better way to do it. A more elegant solution, a more optimized flow. That's fine. Let those refinements come after action. Let improvement come from contact with the real. Let your systems evolve in response to your actual needs, not your imagined ideal. Because real momentum only builds through contact with resistance, not through the illusion of clarity. You don't need another plan. You need the courage to implement the one you already made. You need to feel the resistance and move anyway. You need to let the version of you who's always planning step aside so that the version who builds can finally take over. Because until you do that, nothing changes. Nothing leaves your head. Nothing reaches the world. And you will continue to convince yourself that you're just one more tweak away from becoming consistent. However, consistency does not begin with systems. It begins with action. Action, even when it's disorganized. Action, even when it's inefficient. Action, even when it scares you. Let the plan serve the work, but never let it replace it. Your delay has a personality. The way you delay is not random. It's not just a reaction to stress or a lapse in willpower. It's a pattern, a signature, a reflex that's been shaped by time, repetition, memory, and fear. The longer you avoid the work, the more your hesitation starts to take on structure. It becomes familiar, predictable, personal. Your delay develops its own voice, its own logic, its own set of moves, and before long, it stops feeling like resistance. It starts feeling like you. You don't just procrastinate. You procrastinate in a very specific way. Maybe you scroll, maybe you plan, maybe you clean, pace, snack, research. Maybe you pretend you're thinking when you're really avoiding. Maybe you tell yourself you're just waiting for the right moment. And because you've done it so many times, it doesn't feel like a decision anymore. It feels automatic, like gravity, like weather, like this is just how you are. But it isn't who you are, it's who you've practiced being. Delay, when repeated enough, becomes an identity. And identity, when left unexamined, becomes destiny. You start to think of yourself as someone who doesn't finish, someone who can't focus, someone who always overthinks. But none of that was written in your DNA. It was built, layer by layer, experience by experience. You gave your delay a personality, you trained it, you rewarded it, and now it speaks to you with confidence. It tells you what to do when the pressure builds. It tells you how to soften discomfort. It tells you how to get relief without risk. And the worst part is, it sounds familiar. It sounds like your own reasoning, your own intelligence. It uses your voice. That's what makes it dangerous. Because when you can't distinguish between your delay and your decision-making, you lose the ability to challenge it. You stop questioning the hesitation. You start trusting it. But that voice is not you. It's a version of you that was built to protect you from discomfort, from failure, from judgment. And it did its job well. It kept you safe. It helped you avoid pain. But now, it's keeping you from everything else too. It's keeping you from building, from showing up, from changing. Every time you obey the delay, it grows stronger, not just in behavior, but in belief. You start to think, this is just how I function. You start to say things like, I'm just not consistent, or I always lose momentum, or I never follow through. You forget that these are not facts, they are rehearsed conclusions. You've repeated the cycle so many times that you've confused repetition with identity. But identity is flexible, it's responsive, it adapts to what you do. This means every time you act despite the delay, you weaken it. You show your system a different pattern. You teach your body that you can feel discomfort and still move. You teach your mind that uncertainty does not mean stop, that pressure does not mean hiding, that hesitation does not mean quitting. The first step is noticing the personality of your delay. How does it speak to you? What phrases does it use? What excuses feel most convincing? What rituals does it perform when it wants you to back off the work? Learn its voice. Study its tactics. Because only then can you interrupt them. If you don't know what you're fighting, you can't beat it. Sometimes your delay will disguise itself as kindness. It will say, "Take a break, you've been through a lot." Sometimes it will disguise itself as logic. It will say, "Wait until you're more clear." Sometimes it will disguise itself as standards. It will say, "You can't start until it's perfect," but the motive is always the same. Avoid exposure, avoid failure, avoid effort that doesn't guarantee reward. But you are not a machine that exists to produce perfect results. You are a human being capable of evolution. And evolution requires friction. There is no growth without resistance. There is no forward motion without pushing against the pattern that wants to keep you still. Your delay has learned your every move. It knows how to reach you. But that also means you can learn it. You can see its patterns for what they are. Not truth, not identity, just programming. And programming can be rewritten. This won't happen overnight. You won't suddenly become immune to hesitation. But you can become immune to the lie that hesitation means stop. You can feel the delay rising and moving anyway. That is how you break it. That is how you start to redefine what it means to be you. Not someone who avoids, but someone who sees the wall and decides to step through it anyway. And when you do that enough times, something shifts. Your delay loses authority. Its voice gets quieter. Your reflex to retreat begins to fade. And in its place, a new identity starts to take root. One is based not on fantasy, but on proof. Proof that you can be trusted. That you can begin even when it's inconvenient. That you can finish even when it's hard. That you are no longer a servant to your hesitation. Your delay has a personality, but it's not permanent. It's not destiny. It's a learned pattern. And the moment you stop obeying it, you start reshaping it. That's where the shift begins. Not in some breakthrough, not in some surge of motivation, but in a single decision. A single step is taken without waiting for comfort. That's all it takes to begin rewriting the script, one interruption at a time. What you'll never get back. There are things you can recover: lost money, broken routines, missed opportunities that circle back. But time is not one of them. You can pause a project, silence a conversation, hold off on a decision, but time moves whether you do or not. And with each passing moment, something is quietly leaving you. Not just hours on the clock, not just days on the calendar, but versions of yourself that were only possible in that window. And once that window closes, those versions do not wait for you to catch up. This is the cost of hesitation, not just delay, loss, irreversible loss. We are told to be patient with ourselves, and sometimes that's true, but not always, not forever. Because patience, when used as an excuse for inaction, becomes surrender. It becomes spiritualized avoidance. It turns time into a backdrop rather than a force that shapes your entire reality. There are chapters of your life that have already expired because you waited too long. Opportunities that matched who you were at a particular moment. Projects that would have stretched your identity if you had just said yes. Energy you had but didn't use. The insight that came, then faded. You look back now and say, "I wasn't ready." But the truth is, you were never meant to be ready. You were meant to respond, not perfectly, but promptly. Not fully prepared, but fully engaged. Time doesn't just pass, it takes things with it. And one of the hardest things to accept is that you don't get those things back. You can recreate something else. You can build again. But it won't be the same. The chemistry will be different. The season will have shifted. The people will have changed. And you'll be someone else too. Not worse, but different. And that difference matters. There's this belief that if an idea is important enough, it will return. That what's meant for you will wait. But ideas don't wait. They move. They visit. They test your readiness. They knock once and move on. You might get another one, maybe. But not that one. Not in that form. Not with that timing. not with that particular sense of urgency that pulsed through your body and told you this matters. You've had those moments, a burst of clarity, a flash of alignment, a day when everything felt alive and possible. And what did you do? Maybe you made a note. Maybe you put it on a to-do list. Maybe you told yourself, I'll get to it soon. But the window closed, the inspiration dissolved, the momentum faded, and you were left holding a dead blueprint for something that once had a pulse. That is the quiet cost of waiting. And it adds up. The list grows. All the things you almost started, all the moments you almost captured, all the chances you let slide by, you carry them with you, not always consciously. But they show up in the form of restlessness, of anxiety, of shame, of that gnawing sense that you are behind, that you missed something important, that you could have become someone more. You feel the weight of what's been lost, even if you can't name it. This is not meant to shame you. This is meant to wake you, because there's still time, not unlimited time, but enough to begin now, enough to stop accumulating regret in slow motion, enough to make the choice that your future self will look back on and say, that was the moment everything started to change, not because the result came quickly, but because you finally stopped waiting for time to carry you. Time doesn't carry you. It offers you a ride. But you have to get on. You have to meet it. You have to say yes before it passes. Not every day will feel like an opening, but some will. And when they do, you have to move. Because if you don't, you will look back and realize that your life was not shaped by lack of opportunity, but by lack of response. We overestimate what we can get back. We underestimate what we've already lost. Do you think you'll catch up next week? You think the spark will return when life slows down. You think your future self will be more focused, more disciplined, and more inspired. But the truth is, your future self is being shaped right now. Not by intention, but by action. Not by what you plan to do, but by what you are choosing today. Because every day you delay, you're not just standing still. You are becoming someone else. Someone is more hesitant, more risk-averse, more fragile in your belief that action is safe. This is why momentum matters, not because speed is everything, but because direction is everything. When you move, even clumsily, you begin to shape time. You begin to meet it on your terms. You stop drifting and start deciding. You don't need a perfect path. You need a pulse, a signal that you are alive in your own life. That you are not letting time make all the choices while you sit and hope for clarity. You can reclaim a lot of things. You can rebuild trust. You can repair consistency. You can restart what you abandoned, but you cannot reclaim time. You cannot recover the exact chemistry of that past version of you who once felt ready, or desperate, or brave. And that's why now matters. Not in a motivational sense, in a mathematical one. Because the seconds don't stop, and the shape of your life is being formed by the choices you are avoiding. There will come a day when you will trade comfort for movement, when you would give anything to go back and begin, not because you wanted perfection, but because you finally understood what was being lost while you were waiting. The tragedy is not that life moves fast. The tragedy is that we assume we can move just as fast later, as if momentum is something we can conjure on command. But it isn't. Momentum is expensive. It costs something to build. And the longer you wait, the more expensive it becomes. You don't need to rush. You don't need to panic. But you do need to decide. You do need to admit that time is not neutral. It is not patient. It is not holding space for you while you figure it out. It is offering you a question. Will you move or will you let it leave without you? Because time is moving. And with it, versions of yourself that you will never see again. The window is open now. Maybe only a little, but it's open, and it won't stay that way forever. Every genius was first embarrassing. Genius is rarely graceful at the start. It's rarely obvious. It's rarely cool. The first version of anything meaningful is usually awkward, rough, and invisible. The most brilliant creators, the most iconic thinkers, and the most impactful builders all began in obscurity. They all looked foolish at some point. They all made things that didn't land, spoke words that didn't resonate, and built projects no one noticed. They were ignored and laughed at. Doubted. Not because they lacked value, but because value takes time to reveal itself. And in the beginning, it almost always looks like failure. This is what we forget when we hold ourselves to impossible standards. We consume the polished result and expect our first try to feel like someone else's 10th. We forget that mastery is invisible when it's forming. We see the end product, not the early drafts. We hear the speech, not the stutters. We watch the performance, not the rehearsals. So we start something, feel the awkwardness of being new, and conclude that we must not be ready. But newness is not a sign you're behind. It's a sign you're finally in the right place, the beginning. The people we admire weren't born with finished work. They didn't wake up excellent. They had to earn every inch of it through trial, correction, and consistent public imperfection. They had to face the discomfort of knowing their output didn't yet match their taste. They had to stand in the gap between vision and execution, and they had to stay there longer than most would tolerate. You are not immune to that process. You cannot skip the early phases simply because your mind is sharp or your ambition is high. In fact, those traits often make it harder. The sharper your eye, the more painfully aware you are of the gap. You can see what great looks like. You know what excellent feels like. And when your work doesn't match it, you don't just feel disappointed, you feel ashamed, you feel exposed, you feel like a fraud. But this is not failure, this is the furnace. This is where identity is forged. Because what makes a genius is not perfection, it's persistence. The willingness to stand inside the embarrassment of being seen in progress. The willingness to continue despite underwhelming beginnings. The willingness to look yourself in the eye and say, "This doesn't look like what I imagined yet, and I'm doing it anyway." There's a quiet heroism in continuing when no one is watching, in practicing in the dark, in publishing things that don't get attention, in sharing things that don't get applause. Because every time you do, you strip away your addiction to being perceived as good. And in that stripping, you get closer to becoming someone who is actually good. Not for show, not for praise, but in substance. Embarrassment is part of the price. It always has been. But we've built a culture that forgets this. A culture that worships outcomes, not origins. We assume those who succeed were always ahead, always talented, always confident. And because we don't see the early chapters, we assume our awkward first attempts are proof that we don't belong, that we're not one of them. But the only difference between you and them is time spent failing without flinching. You can spend years avoiding this phase. You can plan, prepare, and protect your reputation. You can wait until you feel ready. But when you finally begin, you will still be bad. You will still stumble. You will still feel the sharpness of your own imperfection. And that's okay. That's necessary. Because the goal is not to avoid looking foolish. The goal is to become unshakable in the presence of your own weakness. Stop hiding from the early mess and start walking through it with your head up. Every person who did something great had to do it badly first. Every legend has an archive of discarded work. Every master has a graveyard of failed experiments. You just don't see them. And that's the danger of hindsight. It edits out the struggle. It turns the climb into a single clean leap. It makes genius look like destiny, not discipline. But you are not here to look effortless. You are here to become undeniable. And that means stepping into the room where your ego might take a hit, where your skills might fall short, where your voice might tremble. It means publishing when you're not sure, speaking before you've rehearsed enough, sharing while your hands are still shaking. Because this is the raw material of greatness, not talent, but exposure, not ease, but repetition. There is no world where you do not get your reps in. There is no shortcut around embarrassment. And if you try to wait until you're immune to it, you'll never begin. You'll die with polished thoughts and untested work, because the beginning will always demand a price, and the price is being seen before you're impressive. Let them see you. Let them see you miss. Let them see you try too hard. Let them see you aim too high and fall short. Because the alternative is to stay in the shadows, polishing potential and avoiding proof. And that is the death of creative identity. When you care more about your image than your output, you lose the thread. You become a performer of ambition instead of a practitioner. Genius is not rare, it's just not easy. It doesn't bloom in private. It doesn't arrive in silence. It shows up in the middle of the mess when you're covered in effort, unsure of the next step, but still standing, still swinging, still building. The work will not always reflect your vision, but it will reflect your truth. And the truth, over time, refines you. It sharpens your voice. It strengthens your process. It builds your name on the back of your willingness to be seen, again and again, without guarantees. So let go of the shame. Let go of the expectation that your beginning should look like someone else's middle. Let yourself be embarrassed. Let yourself be average. Let yourself be new. Because no one skips this part, not the brilliant, not the gifted, not even the legends. Especially not the legends. Motion precedes meaning. Most people wait for clarity before they begin. They wait to feel aligned, to feel inspired, to feel certain that the thing they're doing matters, that it fits their path, that it will be worth it. But that clarity rarely arrives before action. It comes after. It's not something you think your way into. It's something you uncover through movement, through risk, through doing. You sit and try to make sense of it all. You try to find the perfect idea, the perfect plan, the perfect version of the project that will give you confidence. But clarity is not in the plan, it's in the process. It is built through trial, not thought. It comes from friction, from making something, seeing it break, and understanding why. From showing up when you don't feel like it and realizing you survived. From doing the thing you were unsure about and finding something inside it that could never have been predicted. Meaning is not waiting in the distance. It is hiding inside the next step. You reach it by stepping, not by standing still. You cannot think your way into fulfillment. You cannot blueprint your way into purpose. You must live into it. One decision, one risk, one imperfect motion at a time. You think the hesitation is because you lack understanding, but the hesitation exists because you're trying to skip the discomfort of ambiguity. You want to feel sure, but sure is not something you get handed. Sure is something you build, and building requires motion, not just mental motion, physical motion, actual action. This is where most people get stuck. They believe the direction must be known before the path can be walked. They believe the purpose must be clear before the effort begins. But all the wisdom they are waiting for is buried under layers of inaction. Buried beneath the fear of making a wrong move. The belief that mistakes waste time. But stillness is far more expensive than movement. Waiting for certainty costs you more than moving with doubt ever will. You don't find meaning and then act. You act, and meaning begins to take shape, not all at once, but piece by piece, through feedback, through results, through the feeling of showing up and watching something grow where there was nothing before. You do not need to know the full story before you write the first sentence. You do not need to see the entire path to take a single step. The next step is what unlocks the one after that. There is a lie that says real work comes from deep inner alignment, that until your soul says yes, you are wasting your energy. But the truth is that alignment is noisy. It changes. It stutters. It contradicts itself. Waiting for alignment before movement is like waiting for silence in the middle of a storm. It's not coming. What comes is a signal, a nudge, a moment of energy, a flicker of interest. And if you move on it, that flicker can grow. But if you wait for more, it fades. Every meaningful path I've ever seen begins in motion. Not in meditation, not in planning. In motion. Someone trying, someone making, someone doing, even if they are unsure. Especially if they are unsure. Because the motion gives them something real to respond to. They learn what fits, what doesn't, what stirs something deep, what falls flat. And from that, direction is born. You can't calibrate a compass that isn't moving. You can't adjust a voice that hasn't spoken. You can't evolve an idea that's never been built. Motion is what gives feedback. Feedback is what gives clarity. Clarity is what gives meaning. That's the order. And when you try to reverse it, everything stops. You may be sitting right now with 10 ideas, waiting for one to feel right, for one to rise above the rest and say, "Pick me." But none of them will. Not yet. Not until you begin. Because the idea is not the answer. The idea is the starting point. The answer is in the response, from you, from the work, from the world. Start small, test fast, build ugly, get it wrong, learn why. That is the rhythm of discovery. That is the rhythm of meaning. It's not clean, it's not poetic, it's not always inspiring, but it's real. And real is the only way anything ever becomes clear. The most lost people I've worked with were not those who made the wrong moves. They were the ones who made none. They waited for a feeling, for permission, for a perfect moment. And while they waited, the path narrowed. Their ideas cooled, their confidence dissolved. Not because they were broken, but because they forgot the truth. Motion is not the result of clarity, it is the cause. You will not find your voice by thinking about it. You will not find your gift by imagining what it might be. You will not find your edge by trying to feel into it forever. You will find it when you move. When you build, when you publish, when you speak, when you share, when you release something into the world and let it teach you. This is the secret. Most people don't start because they think they need to feel something first, but the feeling follows the effort, not the other way around. So move, without certainty, without confidence, without a 5-year plan. Move with doubt in your chest and fire in your gut. Move even if you don't know what it means. Especially if you don't know what it means. Because meaning is not a light you wait to see. It is a light you create by stepping into the dark. The pain of first attempts. There's a kind of pain that's hard to name. It doesn't come from injury. It doesn't come from loss. It comes from trying sincerely and wholeheartedly and being met with disappointment. You finally start. You finally gather enough will to face the blank page, to speak the idea, to show up. And what you create is not what you imagined. It feels clunky. It feels wrong. It doesn't reflect the vision you carried for so long in your head. And suddenly, all the energy that got you to the starting line drains, because you expected something else. You expected it to feel better than this. No one prepares you for this moment. The emotional weight of the first attempt, the tension between what you wanted it to be and what it actually is, the embarrassment, even if no one else sees it, the frustration, the shame, you feel exposed, not just for the flaws in your work, but for daring to believe you were capable of something more. It's not just a bad draft. It's a hit to your identity. And this is where most people stop. Not because they don't care, but because they care too much. Because seeing the gap hurts. Because standing in the space between vision and execution hurts. You think you're the only one. You think everyone else figured out how to skip this part. But they didn't. They just stayed in it long enough to see what was on the other side. The pain of the first attempt is universal. It's part of every creative process, every new chapter, every skill ever learned. And yet, we treat it like a sign that we're doing something wrong. That the discomfort means we're on the wrong path. That the mess means we don't have what it takes. But the mess is not a problem, it's a requirement. The only way to reach anything meaningful is to go through this part. The part where nothing works yet. The part where your hands don't move the way you thought they would. The part where your words fall flat. The part where your energy fades and nothing looks the way you imagined. We are trained to expect early success, conditioned to believe that passion should feel good, that if you're aligned it should flow, that if it's right, it won't feel like struggle. But alignment is not a feeling, it's a direction, and passion is not a guarantee of ease. In fact, the more you care, the more it hurts when it doesn't land. The more it hurts when your effort feels invisible, when your vision feels out of reach. You are not broken for feeling this pain. You are not weak for feeling disappointed. You are doing the most difficult thing a person can do. You are attempting to translate your inner world into something external, something real, something other people can see. And that translation is never clean at the start. It is always full of noise, distortion, and feedback that makes you question why you began it all. But this pain is not a wall. It's a tunnel. You don't get over it. You don't get around it. You walk through it, slowly, repeatedly, and eventually it stops burning the way it did before. Not because the work got easier, but because you stopped needing it to feel good all the time. This is how confidence is built, not by being right, not by succeeding, but by surviving the moments when you feel like quitting and choosing not to. By realizing that the discomfort didn't destroy you, that the silence didn't define you, that awkwardness didn't kill your voice, that you can feel all of it and still continue. The first attempt will often disappoint you. It will show you everything you don't yet know. It will expose your limitations. It will test your commitment, and that's exactly what it's supposed to do. It's not a test of talent, it's a test of tolerance. Can you tolerate the early noise long enough to refine your signal? Can you tolerate being seen at half-formed so that one day you can be seen as whole? If the answer is yes, then you are already ahead of most, because most people quit right here. They don't want to be misunderstood. They don't want to be seen trying and not yet succeeding. So they stay quiet. They stay in the draft phase. They stay in the dream phase, because dreaming doesn't require exposure, but the action does. The pain of the first attempt is where you choose who you're going to be. Someone who waits for perfection, or someone who walks through imperfection until they build something real. Someone who hides behind preparation, or someone who enters the room as they are. Someone who gives up the moment it stings, or someone who stays long enough to heal in motion. The truth is, the pain will always be there in some form. The discomfort of showing up never fully goes away. You just learn how to carry it. You learn how to stop interpreting it as a warning sign. You stop waiting for the work to feel good before it begins to matter. And slowly, your nervous system adapts. Your identity adapts. You stop flinching every time something doesn't land. You stop needing the first try to be a masterpiece. You stop running from the silence. Because of that silence, that sting, that moment when your work doesn't echo back with applause, that is where integrity is built. That is where the difference is made between people who finish and people who only fantasize. You don't get to skip this part, but you do get to choose what it means. Let it mean you're on the edge. Let it mean you're alive in your work. Let it mean you're one of the rare ones who didn't let the first attempt define their entire story. Because all greatness lives beyond that point. Past the silence, past the sting, past the first awkward, uncertain, unfinished version of whatever you're trying to become. Stay with it. Begin before you deserve to. You think you need to earn it first, the right to begin, the right to speak, the right to call yourself a creator, a writer, a builder, an artist, a leader. You think there's a level you have to reach before you're allowed to act. Some invisible threshold of preparation, of skill, of self-understanding, and until you cross it, you hesitate, you study. You analyze, you plan, you say one day, but one day is a moving target. And the belief that you must deserve your start before you take it is a lie. One that's keeping you from ever reaching the place where you finally feel ready. Readiness is not a moral achievement. It's not something you arrive at by collecting enough knowledge, or waiting long enough, or finally getting over your doubt. Readiness is a decision, a posture, a willingness to step into the process before you've been validated. You don't wait until you've earned a seat at the table. You take it, and then you build the work that makes you belong. The world will rarely tell you that you're ready. You will rarely feel like you're ready. And that's the truth most people spend their whole lives trying to avoid. They keep chasing permission. They keep trying to feel worthy. But worthiness is not what grants you motion. Motion is what builds your sense of worth. Because until you begin, all you have is a theory. A theory about who you are. A theory about what you might be capable of. A theory about how your life could feel. But theories don't change you. Experiences do. You've convinced yourself that once you become more consistent, more confident, more focused, you'll be ready to start. But all of those things are built inside the process, not before it. You become consistent by showing up on the days you feel scattered. You become confident by taking action while you still feel unsure. You become focused by doing the work even when you're distracted. All the qualities you think are prerequisites are actually results. You don't wait until you deserve to begin. You begin and become someone who deserves it in motion. But there's a deeper fear underneath the hesitation. You don't just feel unprepared, you feel unworthy. You think that if you begin before you're good enough, you'll be exposed, that people will see the gap, that you'll be revealed as someone who doesn't belong. But the only way to close that gap is to walk straight into it. The only way to build a real identity is to stop protecting the imagined one. It's easy to believe that beginning early is arrogant, that stepping forward without full mastery is self-indulgent, that waiting until you're perfect is a kind of humility, but it's not humility. It's fear. Fear wrapped in a noble costume. Because real humility is being willing to be seen as less than what you hope to become. It's saying, I am not there yet, and still showing up. That is honesty. That is integrity. That is the birthplace of all real growth. You are not supposed to begin from a place of mastery. You are supposed to begin from a place of exposure, because the beginning, by definition, is the start of the thing, not the proof that you've already arrived. If you were already who you want to be, there would be no need to start. The act of beginning is what carves out the person you are trying to become. It is not the result of becoming that person. This is the uncomfortable truth most people avoid. They keep preparing. They keep waiting for some inner shift. But that shift doesn't come until you begin. There's no way to feel fully deserving of the path before you walk it, because the version of you that can handle the path doesn't exist yet. That version is on the other side of the process. And the only way to reach them is to move now, while you still feel like a fraud, while you still doubt, while you still think you need more time. You don't need more time, you need more contact with reality, with the work, with the resistance, with the version of yourself that only shows up when you do. You think you're waiting to be ready, but really, you're waiting to feel safe. Safe from failure, safe from being misunderstood, safe from your own disappointment. But nothing about this is safe. And that's what makes it real. The courage to begin before you feel ready is not about recklessness, it's about truth. The truth that you are never going to arrive at the starting line fully formed. That you are never going to be handed a certificate that says you're worthy now. You're just going to have to choose, to act while scared, to move while uncertain, to claim your space before someone else gives it to you. And you are allowed to do that. You are allowed to start while unqualified, while imperfect, while unsure. Because the only thing worse than failing is never starting at all. The only thing more painful than being seen in your early form is never letting yourself evolve past it. The only thing more damaging than judgment is a lifetime spent trying to avoid it. You will never build anything meaningful if you wait until you feel like you've earned the right. You will wait forever. And the longer you wait, the harder it becomes to begin. Because your silence starts to rewrite your identity. You stop thinking of yourself as someone who hasn't started yet. You start thinking of yourself as someone who doesn't start. And that's a belief you cannot afford to let harden. Start now, not because you are ready, but because readiness is the reward for starting. Not because you are worthy, but because action is how worth is built. Not because you are certain. However, certainty is what emerges when doubt is faced over and over until it weakens. Begin, not because you feel like it, not because the conditions are right, but because your future depends on your ability to move before everything makes sense. The world is not waiting to hand you a permission slip. You write your own. With your effort. With your risk. With your willingness to be seen trying. You're not waiting, you're dying slowly. You tell yourself you're waiting, waiting for clarity, waiting for alignment, waiting for the right time, the right energy, the right version of yourself to arrive. But you are not waiting. You are slowly decaying, quietly dissolving into your own hesitation. You don't notice it at first. The days blur, the ideas still excite you, the plans still live inside your head. But underneath it all, something is eroding, not your ambition, not your skill, your aliveness. Waiting suggests stillness, something peaceful, something wise. But what you're calling waiting is something else. It is corrosion, the slow breakdown of identity through inaction, the slow detachment from your own voice, the slow suffocation of the part of you that used to believe in momentum. The longer you sit in that space between intention and motion, the more you convince your nervous system that hesitation is safety, that stillness is strength, that doubt is wisdom. And eventually, you start confusing numbness with peace. But this is not peace. This is quiet despair. This is a silent grief for the person you could have become if you had acted. You feel it in your chest when you look at the blank page, in your gut when you think about what you haven't started, in the tension in your shoulders when someone asks how things are going and you lie through a smile. You feel the weight of the pause, and that pause is getting heavier. You think you're protecting your potential by waiting, but the potential that is not expressed becomes rot. Ideas that are not built become poison. And over time your mind becomes cluttered with ghosts of what could have been. They sit there, watching you, not to haunt you, to beg you, to move, because they know they cannot survive much longer in your imagination. They know that unless you act, they will die without ever being seen. Every moment of hesitation is not neutral, it is shaping you. You become what you repeat. And if you repeat delay long enough, you become someone who believes they must always delay. If you avoid long enough, you become someone who thinks avoidance is instinct. You say you're waiting, but really, you're teaching your body that discomfort is to be escaped, that doubt is to be obeyed, that the feeling of resistance is a reason to stop instead of a signal to begin. You weren't born to wait. You were born to move, to build, to speak, to shape your environment through effort. The body was designed for motion. The mind was designed for change. But when you suppress both, they begin to rebel. You feel it as restlessness, as boredom that can't be solved with distraction, as anxiety that doesn't point to anything specific. Because it's not about what you haven't done, it's about who you haven't allowed yourself to become. You think this version of you is safe. You think not acting will preserve something. But the longer you stay here, the more brittle you become, the more fragile, the more easily discouraged, the more addicted to control. Because the less you move, the more pressure you place on your next move to be perfect. And the more perfect you try to make it, the less likely you are to begin. This is the spiral. You don't just delay. You delay and then resent yourself for it. You resent yourself and then avoid the work even more. You avoid the work and then start believing you're incapable. That belief becomes a filter. Every new idea is seen through it. Every burst of motivation is crushed by it. And soon, the part of you that used to be excited is replaced by the part of you that just wants to be left alone. You're not waiting, you're dying slowly. You tell yourself you're waiting, waiting for clarity, waiting for alignment, waiting for the right time, the right energy, the right version of yourself to arrive. But you are not waiting. You are slowly decaying, quietly dissolving into your own hesitation. You don't notice it at first. The days blur, the ideas still excite you, the plans still live inside your head. But underneath it all, something is eroding, not your ambition, not your skill, your aliveness. Waiting suggests stillness, something peaceful, something wise. But what you're calling waiting is something else. It is corrosion, the slow breakdown of identity through inaction, the slow detachment from your own voice, the slow suffocation of the part of you that used to believe in momentum. The longer you sit in that space between intention and motion, the more you convince your nervous system that hesitation is safety, that stillness is strength, that doubt is wisdom. And eventually, you start confusing numbness with peace. But this is not peace. This is quiet despair. This is a silent grief for the person you could have become if you had acted. You feel it in your chest when you look at the blank page, in your gut when you think about what you haven't started, in the tension in your shoulders when someone asks how things are going and you lie through a smile. You feel the weight of the pause. And that pause is getting heavier. You think you're protecting your potential by waiting, but the potential that is not expressed becomes rot. Ideas that are not built become poison. And over time your mind becomes cluttered with ghosts of what could have been. They sit there, watching you, not to haunt you, to beg you, to move, because they know they cannot survive much longer in your imagination. They know that unless you act, they will die without ever being seen. Every moment of hesitation is not neutral. It is shaping you. You become what you repeat. And if you repeat delay long enough, you become someone who believes they must always delay. If you avoid long enough, you become someone who thinks avoidance is instinct. You say you're waiting, but really, you're teaching your body that discomfort is to be escaped, that doubt is to be obeyed, that the feeling of resistance is a reason to stop instead of a signal to begin. You weren't born to wait. You were born to move, to build, to speak, to shape your environment through effort. The body was designed for motion. The mind was designed for change. But when you suppress both, they begin to rebel. You feel it as restlessness, as boredom that can't be solved with distraction, as anxiety that doesn't point to anything specific. Because it's not about what you haven't done, it's about who you haven't allowed yourself to become. You think this version of you is safe. You think not acting will preserve something. But the longer you stay here, the more brittle you become, the more fragile, the more easily discouraged, the more addicted to control. Because the less you move, the more pressure you place on your next move to be perfect. And the more perfect you try to make it, the less likely you are to begin. This is the spiral. You don't just delay. You delay and then resent yourself for it. You resent yourself and then avoid the work even more. You avoid the work and then start believing you're incapable. That belief becomes a filter. Every new idea is seen through it. Every burst of motivation is crushed by it. And soon, the part of you that used to be excited is replaced by the part of you that just wants to be left alone. Begin. Begin again. You are standing at the edge again, the moment before motion, the space between knowing and doing. It feels familiar because you've been here before. More than once. Maybe more times than you're willing to admit. And every time, you feel the same tension, the same pressure, the same voice asking, "Is this it? Is this the time I finally follow through?" You want to believe the answer is yes, but part of you still hesitates, still wonders, still waits. That's okay. Because beginning is not something you do once, it's something you do again and again. Sometimes with force, sometimes with fear, sometimes quietly, with no one watching. The beginning is not a door you walk through, it's a decision you make every single time you face resistance and choose to move anyway. There will never be a moment when beginning stops being necessary, because no matter how far you go, no matter what you build, you will still meet new walls, new chapters, new doubts. And every one of them will ask the same question. Will you begin again? The people who build lives they are proud of are not the ones who had the clearest vision. They are not the ones who had the most talent. They are the ones who kept starting, through failure, through silence, through discouragement, through self-doubt, through every moment that whispered, "You're not ready." And still, they chose to move. You will never become someone who does not struggle with doubt. That person does not exist. But you can become someone who doubts and still acts, who fears and still speaks, who stumbles and still stands back up. That is the real difference. Not the absence of fear, but the presence of movement in the face of it. And the most powerful movement you will ever make is beginning again. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's honest. Because it says, I see the mess, and I still believe there's something here worth building. I see the gap, and I still believe it can be closed. I see how long I've waited, and I still believe it's not too late. It's not too late. You are not too far behind. You are not too broken. You are not too inconsistent. You are not defined by what you haven't done. You are defined by what you do next. That is where your story always begins. In the next decision, the next step, the next act of courage. And it will take courage, because beginning is always an act of risk. Even if it's small, even if it's quiet. It is a rejection of the story that says you must wait longer. It is a revolt against the part of you that believes comfort is the goal. It is the spark that says life is not something you sit inside. It is something you participate in. Begin, even if it's messy. Begin, even if it's tiny. Begin, even if you know you'll fall again. Begin because it is the only thing that will make you feel like yourself again. Begin because it is the only thing strong enough to silence the shame. Begin because the weight you are carrying is not from failure. It is from delay, from silence, from potential that has nowhere to go. Let it move. Let it breathe. Let it be real. You will be tempted to hesitate. You will hear the voice that tells you this time will be like the last. That you will begin and quit again. That you will start strong and fade. That you will fall short and have nothing to show for it. But here is what you must remember. The success of the past does not guarantee anything, and neither does the failure. The only thing that shapes you is what you do now. So begin again, not to prove anything, not to fix anything, but because you are still alive, because you are still allowed to participate in your own becoming. Because even now, with everything that has been missed, delayed, or abandoned, you are still here. And being here means you have a choice. You can stay in the loop, keep replaying the hesitation, keep rewriting the plan, keep overthinking every step until time decides for you. Or you can interrupt it, right now, not with force, not with a breakthrough, with a single action that says, I will not let another version of me die waiting. You do not have to believe in yourself to begin. You do not have to be confident. You only have to be willing. Willing to be seen, willing to be wrong, willing to try. That willingness is what separates the ones who build from the ones who talk. You know what happens when you wait. You've seen it. You've felt it. You carry the weight of it every day. What happens if, this time, you begin? Not in the fantasy, not in the future. Right now, as you are, with what you have. Let this be the start. Let this be the moment you remember, not because everything changed in an instant, but because this time you did not abandon yourself. This time you did not let the fear decide. This time you began. And when you fall, and you will fall, begin again. And when you doubt, and you will doubt, begin again. And when it's hard and quiet and invisible, begin again. Because that is what momentum is made of. Not fire, not perfection, not motivation. Repetition, commitment, faith in movement over the outcome. This is your path, not a clean line, a series of restarts, a rhythm of remembering, a life built by returning. So let's return. Not because we are ready, but because we are done waiting.